Hey, Simone here with Bulletproof Business Growth, as always, with some ideas and insights, what to pay attention to when you are in the process of growing and scaling your business. Now, today we're going to talk about one of the most common practices that many businesses have, but unfortunately, it's more of a lip service than a practice, and it can make the difference between having a team that is aligned, that's productive, that's self-managing, and one that's barely turning on the faucet and basically phoning it in and doing the bare minimum. So let's talk about values. I just read this great article in Harvard Business Review that said that 80% of companies have stated values, but really only about 23% of businesses actually practice those values or have some sort of practice around these values, talk about the values. Only really 23% of people know actually what they are and how they show up. So we got to think about what is the humongous opportunity we are missing here? Because why are values actually important? Well, because they foster shared understanding, shared language, shared responsibility, standards, beliefs, accountability, pretty much all those things as business owners that we really, really want, that enable us to step out of the driver's seat more into the background where we can actually focus on growing the business and being more strategic because the team has got it. They're actually not just functional, they're at that all-star level. So when you think about it, what core values or values in general mean at most companies, it's a piece of interior decoration rather than a practice, because it's probably going to be some poster in a break room, in a cafeteria, in a hallway, in some place where, the company thinks that's where people see it. But you know how that goes. You might see something that's new that just got put there, and you'll see it for a few days, and then it just starts blending in like furniture, and it doesn't do anything. So what we really want these values to do is we want them to clearly articulate and communicate what this organization stands for. It is the most important articulation for how we serve our clients, how we do our work, what the approach is, how we do our work. So it is all about what we stand for, how we serve our clients, and what's most important in the way that we execute. So what happens instead is most actually don't really know what these stated values mean, even when they're posted in the break room, because they've never talked about it. At most, it's maybe something that got pointed out when they got hired. Maybe it's in the handbook. Maybe it's something that got talked about in the interview, but they haven't heard about it since. And that is such a humongous loss of opportunity right there. Because when we don't work with it, right, when it's not part of the discussion, when it's not part of the decision-making process, when it's not something that gets talked about in terms of how it's important in our daily practice, well, of course, it's not going to become part of our daily practice. Because when you think about when you do this right, especially when you're in a growth phase, your values can serve as those stretch assignments that help people kind of step out of being a little stagnant, a little too comfortable, a little too used to just doing what they do, and help them step into a new identity, new practices, new ways of showing up. So that's really what we want. Remember, what we're talking about right now is 80% of companies have stated values, but only 23% of companies actually practice those values. And you want to be in the 23%, because it can make a humongous difference in how your people show up. So let's talk about what values look like in most companies. It's mostly something pretty generic and something really common, where it's like honesty, integrity, inclusivity, diversity. it all sounds great. There's really nothing wrong with the intention of any of these, but the biggest problem with it is they don't translate into anything that's practicable, that's actionable, that actually means something in this specific setting. So we really want something that translates. The way we teach values, it's not a value if it's something that can be said about any other company. That just means it's a generic value for businesses in general. But what we want to get to is specific values that are unique to you, because people know exactly what this means and how this shows up in your daily practice, in their daily actions, in the way that they behave, in the way that they think, and of course in the way that they operate. That's the most important part. So this is really about, how do we live by this? How do we arrange our priorities? How do we make decisions? How do we take our actions? This is the Bible, the guidelines for everything in the company, how we show up, how we behave with each other, how we behave with our clients. It is really about that internal system that guides everything. So one thing that we've noticed over time is, what's even worse is when you have values. So you say all this stuff, but then you do the opposite. And that sets up a culture of distrust. And, you don't want to have people who are kind of disbelieving of what you say and do because they don't see it. You say one thing, then you do another, so that creates a big gap in people's trust. So when you think about what do people really want, right? And especially, your team, most of them probably come out of your biggest talent pools, which are Gen Z and millennials. And as we've talked about before, employee expectations have changed dramatically. And it's kind of like you get with the times, or the times leave you behind on this, because these generations will not sign on with you when they feel like there's a big gap between what they value and what you value, and there's no clear communication. So what do they really want? They want clarity on how to work together. They want clear boundaries that also shape the direction for how they show up, how they talk, how they interact with each other, and also that help them understand how these behaviors, this is the important part, right? The impact of these behaviors, how these behaviors actually shape the direction of the company. So this is like the purpose discussion, the impact discussion, the human values discussion of I matter and what I do matters, because I want to make sure that I'm a part of that. Because when people are unclear on what's important, they can't deliver. So it's pretty much impossible. Like, when it's unclear what's important, it's impossible. When leaders are acting in opposition, well, then it's really impossible. So one is like, well, we don't really know what to do here. But if leaders are acting in opposition, then it creates all sorts of internal language. So it's not surprising when values are done badly to start, because that's kind of how it works. Generally, there's nobody who really knows how to do it. There's nobody who is focused on this creation. There's nobody who's focused on the perpetual practice of these values. So why it's important is, when we have values that are done right, it fosters the collaborative process, and it helps the team understand how to teach process. So when you think about what it does, it's like we talk about specific standards, specific beliefs, specific practices, But then how does that show up? And how do we teach each other so that we become a cohesive, not just group of people, but a cohesive team? So instead of having opposition and not clarity and where all sorts of stuff just kind of flies, we want to get to a place where we really buy into this is a new era of how we're getting work done, because we're really moving from this oppositional hierarchical process to where we have actions and frameworks that support collaboration and co-creation that foster healthy culture. Because again, it's all these bunch of buzzwords, but they're buzzwords because they're not practiced, they're not done right, so they actually create more backpedaling than they create moving forward. So what we really want instead is we want to develop working agreements that are meaningful. So values might be, let's think of those as kind of like the core values that you do post on your website that are all about, you as a company, how you show up, and how you interact with your clients. That's one thing. But what we're talking about now are working agreements that help everybody to show up with each other. How do we partner with leadership and peers? How do we become participants in what goals and expectations are? How do we create impact? How do we create purpose? So all this stuff that I'm talking about is crucial when you're hiring, when you're working on performance improvement, when you're working on getting your team to a higher level, when you want to produce more with less without having to pay astronomical amounts of money. Because money, I hear this all day long. People want to be paid these like crazy amounts of money. People have to be paid well. But performance is not going to happen without everything that I'm talking about right now. So we have to look at this as this is the glue that holds everything together. So we really want to get to a place where you have working agreements and a practice around this. So this means values, this means planning, and this means a practice around this that fosters the behavior you want to see, decision making, people who can really run with making decisions, and collaboration between leadership and peer-to-peer. And that's really, I talked a lot about this in the last episode. When you get to a place where you have peer-to-peer delegation, where you have, this is kind of like the very next level of delegation, that means you are just further and further removed from being the hub in your business, which means you can focus far more on what you should actually be doing, which is growing the business and making the decisions that only you can make, or doing the work that only you can do. So we want to get to this place where we have values, where we have a really good plan, and then it results in actions that are next level. So this is kind of like we move from implicit practices, behavior, values, and beliefs to explicit, clear, actionable situations. Okay? So we need 3 key components to build this effective collaboration. One, we need shared language. So this is written collaboration, written articulation of great beliefs, values, standards, practice. And then we need, because that results in clear, specific, unique definitions of how you as a company do stuff, right? So this is the shared language part. Then we need shared understanding. So we stated the shared language, we articulated the stuff, but then we need to translate this shared language into specific actions. So all the stuff that I just said, what does this actually mean? How do we show up? What does that mean in terms of what to do and also what not to do? Because then the third piece of this is shared accountability. So now that we've discovered this, we actually know it in our bones. We hold each other accountable because now we have very specific and very transparent agreements around what works, what we're all agreeing to, what we're all doing together. And that means it creates trust, and it surfaces, and this is really important for you as a business owner, it surfaces who the people are who can actually grow with you. Because when you have these clear agreements, shared language, shared understanding, now that means we're all rowing in the same direction. We're all on the same page. We're focused on the same priorities, which is super important. And you can see, hey, who's showing up, who's going the extra mile, who's thinking strategically, who can deliver next level results without a ton of babying and hand-holding, and who cannot or who will not. Because this is like, who are our all-stars that we want to keep on the team and we want to keep feeding them. We want to focus our energy on them. And who are the people who are just always going to be sucking our time, money, and energy. So we want to get clear about who those all-stars players are, the ones that we can kind of really, without a maximum amount of effort, grow them from that kind of B region to being the all-stars. And then who are the rest of the people who are not, no matter what we do, they're really not going to show up at the level that we need them to. So we need to know that's clear, because what we're trying to do, what we're doing here, we're building leaders at every single level. And this process allows for this, because we've seen this with any size business. We've seen this with people in businesses with over 100 people. Our typical is kind of like 20 to 30, or actually in small groups. So it doesn't matter how many layers you have, whether you apply this to a whole organization, to a specific team, or even just smaller groups, because this builds agreement in general. So when you're applying this to hiring, well, this gives people clear goals and value for guidance, which is great, but then we need to make sure that they're actually specific enough to hit priority. So we want to give them these goals and values to make sure we control team fit, very, very important, and organizational fit. But we also need to make sure that it's specific enough to translate into priorities and actions. So that's what working agreements do. They're specific to the organization, to the team, to the group, or to the role in terms of a specific timeline, a specific project, a specific process that needs this shared behavior. Okay, so we can apply this at any level. So as an example, it might be something like, hey, looking at our goals, we all need to invest the time to meet the goals, right? We need to invest more time. We need to invest specific time to meet our goals, which means we're actually stretching. It could be we're embracing discomfort or conflict, which we haven't done before, so we can get to this next level. We're going to make difficult, sometimes scary and unpopular decisions in order to foster these results. We make an absolute commitment to follow through no matter what. So can you see how you're taking kind of a generic value and you're turning it into an action, into an agreement that will drive how people work? So this is not just a clear action plan. You have to have a clear action plan around what people will actually do, but then now we are making it actionable. And we're doing that by setting clear beliefs, standards, and priorities and practices that result into action. So we're going from kind of generic and ordinary to unique. So when you think about what I just talked about, the examples I just gave, that is specific to who you are as a company. That is specific to what this project requires. This is specific to what this business area requires in this particular phase. So we want to move away from anything that could be said about anybody. We really want to get into a place where, hey, this is how we show up, this is what we believe in, and this is how we behave. And then we have a plan, and then we have clear actions resulting out of that. So these working agreements and these values, you cannot create those in a vacuum. So it's not something that you sit down as leaders and you just create. This is something that you create with certain team members. Now, the team members you want to call out for that are your A players, because they're already envisioning and living these values and behaviors. And you want to find out from them, what does it mean to them? How do they express it? How do they hear it? How do they articulate it? Because that's the true language of your audience, not yours, right? So you want to find out from them what they see. And what we want to find out about is what's the gap between what we actually have right now and what we need to have so we can reach these next level results. So it's a little bit of a hybrid between, hey, taking what we got and making it a lot better. So we want to discuss the gap with those particular individuals. And we always start with, hey, what's the vision, the big vision, our 3-year strategic plan? What's the purpose in what we do? And how do we get there? And so what we want to impart is like, what about these values is important and what do they look like in action? And we want to find out, so that's like, first we want to find out what we have. Then we want to find out what does that look like in action. And then we also need to find out, like, what are these unstated values that we have? And sometimes those are not positive, but that's just what happened because nobody guarded the values that should have been guarded. So what we need to do this is absolute clarity. So when you sit down to create these agreements, the clarity really comes in with who you are uniquely as a company. You don't want to use any ambiguity. You don't want to use any jargon. You want to say it specifically. How does this show up for us? So we need to have clarity. We need to have alignment with the vision and with the goals. We need to make it measurable so that it's defined as outcomes, right? We're going to do and behave like this, which is going to result in that. Then we're going to make it actionable. It's like, hey, this is what we're actually doing. And then we need to make sure that it's relevant to the guidance and to the decision to the guidance and the decisions that we're making. And it needs to be present. It's like, it's not about what we're going to do one day. It's going to be about what we're doing right now so that we can turn things around, catch more momentum, catch more traction, and really get to that next level of business. And look, once you've gone through all this effort and time to make this happen, the most important aspect is that you actually practice it, talk it up. Nothing will happen if you just create it once and then it's that poster in the break room that we talked about. It's got to be something that is part of your daily life. It's something that you're willing to live and die by. It's something that you use as the central focus for discussions, for decision making, for resolving conflict, for helping people improve performance, for hiring, huge, for actually attracting talent, for managing projects, for anything that you do. It's got to align with these values, with this action plan, and with these working agreements. So I hope this helps. Let us know if you have any questions. We just put a brand new training out that addresses all this in detail. So go to bulletproofbusinessgrowth.com/leap, bulletproofbusinessgrowth.com/leap. Check out the training, and we will see you next time.